Everyone, welcome to another episode of Get Jashed. Today I'm excited to have another guest with me. Today's guest is Dr. Phil Hamdorf. Phil is the CEO of the Australian Sporting Alliance for People with a Disability, so ASAPD, if we do ever reference it again in this conversation. He has a history of working in sports development, including as Executive Chair for Disability Sports Australia, the Director and Executive Director positions in the Department of Premier and Cabinet and the Office of Sport, among a whole bunch of other things. Dr. Phil, as it were, has a PhD in exercise science, is a Fellow of Exercise and Sports Science Australia and Sports Medicine Australia, and sits on the board of multiple sports organisations. So as I'm looking at you, for those who are just listening to this, like I'm looking at Phil and there's literally different sports balls in the background. And so you live and breathe sport. I'm going to call you Dr. Phil because it's a little
That's
bit. What is your sport? What got you into this?
I'm not an elite sports person. I did play football, and I'm from Adelaide. Played football, and then I switched to baseball. I played baseball for about 25 years in Adelaide. And then when I went to Sydney, well, I stopped baseball before I went to Sydney, but I then, at roughly the same time I started football, baseball, I also became a golfer. And that's what I've continued. So I stopped baseball about 20 years ago, and now I play golf, and that's my passion, and I walk. So
Yeah, it's funny because you immediately went to, I'm not an elite sports person, but then you listed off like decades of, and you don't have to be elite to have a sport, right? Like you decades of sports experience where you're like, yeah, I played this for this long. And
yeah, I'm a very average, I think I'm a reasonable golfer. I have a handicap of 7, so that's, I think, pretty good. But as I said, I'm not an Olympian or a Commonwealth Games medalist or anything like that, but I have had a long career in sport and worked with hundreds and hundreds of people, both at the elite level and at the participation level.
yeah, that's sort of evident just looking at your history and your background. So is this the direction you thought your career would take when you were starting out? When you were starting out or doing your PhD, did you know exactly the direction it would take, or was it just sort of going, well, this is what I know next, and this is what I know next?
It's an excellent question. The answer is no. I started my working career as and it's a terrible name, but I was doing a degree of mental deficiency. That's what it was called in Adelaide. I know, it's a horrible name. They changed a long time ago. But it was in working with children and adults with intellectual disability and other disabilities in the Strathmore Centre. And from there, I left that and went teaching, and then went into the Royal Adelaide Hospital for over 2 decades as chief exercise physiologist. Did my PhD there and so forth, and then went into bureaucracy. After that, in South Australian government, moved to Sydney, went into private sector as the CEO of a private non-self-accrediting higher education provider. So it's basically a university that doesn't have the university status. Went back into bureaucracy, did consulting, and then more recently went into the disability sector, if you will, back where I started. And most recently, for the last 6 months, I've been CEO. So no, when I started out, I had no idea that I'd end up here. And yeah, that's just the way careers sort of progress, and they meander in different ways. You never quite know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
No, that's it though. And it was kind of a loaded question on my end, because this is what I have explained to many people. It's like, you don't always know the path. You don't always know every step. Sometimes you just know that next step, or that urge, or that pull to study something, or to just go, this is the direction, and you have to let it unfold. So I wanted to just hear if that was the case for you, just out of curiosity, which is entirely the point of this conversation anyway.
No, and probably the early part of my career, I was a practitioner, I was a teacher, I was a researcher, and so very much at the grassroots level, doing things and so on. And I knew that wouldn't last, and that I would move into the administration, management, bureaucracy side. So that part of my career, I knew I would head towards it, but in doing exactly what, no, I didn't quite know I'd end up in the role I am now.
Yeah. So I've worked, the way we sort of got connected just briefly is I worked for a relatively short amount of time with the with men's goalball. So I was program manager for the Australian men's goalball team for about a year and a half, and then COVID hit and it all happened. But just that amount of experience in disability sports really opened up my eyes, because you kind of, you can probably sort of sit back and cognitively know, oh yeah, there's lots of extra challenges, but when you're in it, you're trying to, fundraise or bring awareness, when you're just watching these people throw themselves in front of a target that they can't see and they're not meant to see, the rules of the sports as well. There's a lot that you sort of notice where you're like, oh, that's interesting. That's very brave and that's very courageous. Do you think that, because you mentioned bureaucracy very specifically a few times, do you think that your experience in bureaucracy as we know it, also like as we know all of the red tape and all of the things, was a good experience leading into working in the disability area with sports? Like, just
Look, I think everyone should put themselves through the pain of bureaucracy and working for it. I worked at two state governments at the highest level as a CEO, and in both of them. I've worked alongside the Commonwealth government, a number of levels. I do a number of committees at the moment at the highest level there. And I work for a minister, a newly appointed minister in New South Wales government. I won't say who it is, a while ago. And so, that's sort of the sharp end of bureaucracy, or the public sector, if you will, that advises bureaucracy. So, look, yes, you have to understand bureaucracy if you're going to work in government and work in across the sector. And you have to understand the way they operate, the way they move, and the way they don't move. And I think, yes, it's been invaluable for me to have had those roles, because I use them every day now. I use the knowledge and learnings every day in my work to still navigate through a disability lens, the bureaucracies, and a great example at the moment, having this, not tussle, but really interesting series of conversations with the NDIS, who are overseen by the NDIA, who also have a commission on the other side, NDIA commission. And it's interesting working with those people, because I'm getting nowhere, by the way, but I've sort of been thrown to and fro, and you kind of got to take it on the chin and think, all right, you've got to go back now and have different sort of mindset, different strategy around how you go back to each of them. So, to answer your question, yeah, look, it has been really valuable for me to work in bureaucracy and to be a bureaucrat, because I know exactly what they're going through when they talk to me about grants, or how they can't announce this, or the minister wants this. I've done all that, so I understand it. So it does help a lot.
do you, like, I like your use of language and things, because you called it a tussle, where a lot of people would use very different words.
I'm sure they would.
Yeah. Which probably, speaks to, like, it sounds like it speaks to your leadership style as well, in the sense of be able to draw on this experience, and if it's not bringing empathy to it, like for people that work with you that might feel frustrated by the process, it might be helping to bring empathy to them for for the other people on the other side of the process.
Yeah.
If not empathy, at least understanding, at least some kind of acknowledgement. But when it comes to, like disability in sports in particular, these are my words, but it's very underrepresented in general. And like, I know that there's people like you who are working really hard to change that, but in the wider scale, it is underrepresented. It is less funded and all of that.
Correct.
What, in your experience, is the reason for needing an alliance for people with a disability in sports?
Yeah. Look, your observations are perfectly correct and spot on. The disability sector has always historically been challenged for attention, for focus, for funding. That's changing a little, and one of the reasons we've joined as an alliance is to to build our strength and to show that we have the numbers, if you will. I represent, very small organisations, Blind Sport Australia, Deaf Sport Australia, and so on, and some larger ones from Special Olympics Australia. But individually, each of them going to government, government gets a little, a little terse, if you will, sometimes a little, maybe even annoyed that all these little groups are coming to knock on their door and, thump on the table and want attention. And I don't blame any of them to do it, and they should keep doing it. What I'm about, though, is saying as a collective, we have more voice, more power, more strength to knock on the door with a louder knock, if you will, and a stronger argument around what we can provide collectively. So that's why I've become so enthusiastic about representing the sector through my role, because I think there is greater strength in unity and in a collective power that we can bring together. And that's what I'm really focusing on at the moment.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense too, because even like if you think psychologically as well, like whoever is like on the government side of things, even if it's a bigger group, one ask, even for the same amount of funding, for example, one ask feels so much less than multiple asks for funding that adds up to the same anyway as the ones.
Yeah.
You're right, like they shouldn't stop asking, but like just for that advocacy and that awareness, it probably helps, well, it would help psychologically to sort of get more support on board.
There's greater capability if you can bring together 8 organisations around the table and say this is what we can deliver. If you're going for grants or whatever, most grant funds now, whether it's ARC or whether it's NHMRC or any of the grant funds, they like to have a collaborative effort. They like a joined up group to come to them and say, as universities, it might be 3 or 4 universities and then partners, this is what we can bring together as a collective to this. And there's real substance in that. So it's with that mindset I've come into the organisation saying that's how we have to approach all of our, whether they're corporate or government or sector stakeholders. We're a collective. We've got strength and power in our collective being because of all what we bring together. And you should look at us. You should deal with us because we're able to deliver these things. So there's a real deliberate focus and strategy on what I'm doing.
Yeah, I like it. I just see sort of so many different ways that approach would work in any organization, like for any kind of thing, because it's collectively, it's the sum is greater than the total is greater than parts, right? It's how can we do this collectively? How can we actually, and when we think about for people listening who aren't aware, also there's a lot of burnout in people who work in in disabilities sports, in disability sector in general, but disability sports, like there's so much burnout because a lot of it's volunteer, or if it's if it's not, it's a lot of it's just the constant trying to just get enough to keep going, just to keep going, just to keep going, just to keep going, and it's really powerful to have that group, have that alliance that is very aptly named to advocate and to to give voice, especially in an you want to say underrepresented, but it's like, yes, but it's not the word I'm looking for. It's this area that doesn't have as probably represented, but have as much awareness around it. Like people don't think of when they think of sports, they don't always immediately think of of disability sports. They think of just the ones that we see on TV most often, and it's it's
very true, and the point you make is spot on, and we use the term invisible disability at the moment because many people don't overtly want others to know about their impairment or limitation or disability, but it's there, and so organisations, and my part of the challenge I have, of course, is working with the 100 or so national sport organisations that are acknowledged by the Australian Sports Commission, working with them so that they have a better understanding of how to engage with people that might have a disability limitation or impairment, bearing in mind that some people don't want to disclose that. And so it is a tricky and a challenging area, but it's an important area because you and I, as people that probably don't have a disability or a limitation or impairment, for us to become physically active or engage in sport or active recreation, or whatever, it's very beneficial for us, from a health perspective and social perspective and so on. And it's equally as important for people with living with a disability. In fact, it's probably more important for them to be active because the benefits are greater on their side of the ledger. So, yeah, it is an area that I'd like to think is growing in terms of awareness and in terms of opportunities. And certainly movements like Paralympics Australia that, they get the headlines because they're dealing with the elite end, the top end that, that go to the Paralympics in Paris and London and so on. But they're bringing greater awareness to it. So I hope that people living with a disability recognize that, it is not just about being an Olympian or, getting on the stage, but it's about being more active, and whether it's sport or whether it's active recreation, leisure, it doesn't really matter as long as they have a positive attitude and a can-do attitude and want to try something. That's half the battle.
Yeah, that's it. I even think of, and I know it's sort of not born with disability, but I even think of veterans and amputees and things like
Yeah.
that. Have adjusted sports, and they really get into that. There is that support there when it's there, so it is awareness.
Yeah,
Um,
and also I was just going to say, don't forget that most people think when we talk about disability, it is someone maybe with an intellectual disability or maybe someone in a wheelchair who has an obvious, that spinal injury. But it's a lot more than that. I mean, I worked in geriatric medicine for 20 years, and almost every single client I saw had a disability, whether it's from a stroke or from knee replacements or Parkinson's, a limitation or other neurological. So, it's not just about the sort of the more popular or typical ones that we would think of when it comes to disability. There's lots of levels of disability, and that's why we use the term impairment and limitation when we talk about our goals. It is a very broad grouping of people.
yeah, and I like that you bring that up as well, because it is that awareness of, like you said, like neurological disability, which
Yeah.
before, there's hidden disabilities, whereas some are very obvious and just as relevant, we know, but like, yeah, there are the ones that are neurological that there's this whole other experience of what it means to be hidden, and then what it means to
Mm.
have to explain it,
Yeah.
versus someone who can just see, like just see that there is a disability, that kind of thing. It's a whole other experience to have to, I imagine, to have to explain something that is
Yeah.
also you're living with, that also that you're trying to advocate for, or just have like life experiences with. It's a
But
whole.
also, it's important to have a mindset that it's not just a matter of saying or seeing someone in a wheelchair and saying, "Oh, right, wheelchair, problem
Mhm.
for us. How are we going to accommodate that?" It's more about saying, okay, this individual who uses a wheelchair, all right, how are we going to increase that ramp or change that situation so the door's wide enough? So it's about taking the positive side, not the negative sort of, oh, how are we going to accommodate this? I think that's a mindset that organizations, companies, and the sector, community generally has to really adopt.
And I like this conversation a lot. It's a conversation that that we see across the board. Even with neurodivergence, it's like the whole conversation of, "Whoa, it's so much effort." It's like, well, actually, it benefits everyone. So
Mm.
what can you do about it? And I like that, bringing that into the, oh, what can we do, rather than the, oh, like, the reaction.
Accommodate this. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, oh, well, how can this actually benefit? And when they're involved, or when they're more involved, everyone benefits,
Yeah.
because contribution, there's more of everything. What was, because you didn't start out in this particular area, what was your learning process around inclusivity in that way?
Well, probably from the early days when I was at Royal Adelaide Hospital. As I said, I was there for over 20 years. So I was head of the agency there. So it certainly opened my eyes to and I was only dealing with mature adults because it was Department of Geriatric Medicine. So most of my people I dealt with were over the age of 60, most of them over 70. But it opened my eyes to the possibilities and to the vitality of people once they recognise. In my case, I was bringing rehabilitation programs to them and physical activity programs. But it was a realisation that, wow, this is, we can do this, we can achieve this. This is actually beneficial for us. And so, for me, that was a wonderful period because I clearly recognised that, sport, when you see it on TV, is all about the young, fit, rugby players or tennis players or, whatever it is, football players. But there's a lot more to sport and to physical activity generally. And so for me, that's the inclusiveness that I was looking for. And I use the term physical activity more often than I probably use the term sport because it's more embracive. Physical activity is the umbrella, if you will, and sport and recreation and leisure all sit beneath it, active transport and so on. So for me, that was the period where I really understood that being inclusive and embracing people that had limitations to doing normal things was actually pretty cool. I really enjoyed it. I loved it, actually. That's why I stayed there 20 years. But it taught me a lot about the capability and willingness of people to really go beyond where they'd been before, because most of the people I saw came through medical interventions, so stroke, knee replacements, and so forth. And so they probably weren't the frontline people that were looking for physical activity.
Right.
Baby, but they discovered it, and I was able to help in that journey of their discovery, and that's the part of the inclusiveness that I love and that I learned a lot about.
Yeah, I think and I asked that question because, the more that we as a society have these sorts of conversations around inclusivity and around sort of changing what was into, something new or doing a little better or whatever it is, sometimes there tends to be an element of either shaming or guilting around it.
Yeah.
And like in many other areas, you sort of see people kind of, it's almost like, I want to do better, but I don't know how, so I'm not going to do it, just in case I get it wrong, or just in case I don't do it right from the get-go, or just in, it's that whole thing. And I think that kind of gets in the way of progress a lot of the time. And I say that because I am definitely guilty of this at times too, where I'm like, I don't want to do the thing because I don't know how and I haven't done it before. And what if I do it wrong?
Yeah.
It stops us from actually just progressing things, progressing like awareness or moving things like this forward and like accessibility and all of these things, because we're like, as humans, we kind of want to do it right before we've actually tried it.
Yeah, oh, and very true. And again, I reflect on when I was with the Royal Adelaide Hospital. Many of my clients there, and I deal a lot with the with neurological, and a lot of clients that had strokes, and those that had very mild residual effects through to those that had extremely profound disability as a consequence. But in all cases, it comes down to really working with the individual and getting them to see the value in becoming more active. In my case, it was about rehabilitation, but having them realize that there is benefit there, even if they have a non-functional right side because of left CVA and they can't move the leg because, and so forth. We have lots of adaptation methodologies and with exercise bikes and rollers and all those sorts of things that move their limbs for them and help them move get to the stage where they could actually realize that they can still move. And so that was half that was most of the challenge, getting people to understand that yes, they have a significant disability, but they can still benefit from movement and from exercise and activity and so on. And it is a tough one because I don't know if you've dealt with people with having severe strokes, but it's an extremely debilitating disorder, and particularly if they've had a stroke where they can no longer communicate, or they can communicate very poorly. it's very challenging, very difficult.
You
But
would feel exactly like, where like that debilitation of being trapped,
oh yes, absolutely.
that you can't quite control the way that you used to be able to. And
Yeah, and particularly in the early days of recovery, people that have difficulty find it extremely challenging, and they do feel trapped. They feel as if they're not able to. You're not listening to them. You can't hear them. They can't talk to you, and you don't understand. So, it requires a huge amount of empathy and time and effort to work with people in that situation to get them, you know, to the next stage of their development of the progression.
how do you like, so I imagine like everyone you work with hasn't necessarily, had the experience in terms of exercise science that you have, and all of that. How do you teach that to, like, now to the people that you work with, in terms of helping them understand without, them necessarily knowing all of the physiology, like, of exercise science behind it?
Yeah,
What?
I mean, there's enough there's enough technical advisors and experts out there to guide you in terms of the intensity and duration and so on, frequency of activity. The difficult challenge is working with an individual at a very close level and understanding them, trying to understand their thought process, trying to understand what they're going through, and how you can move their frame of mind, move their thinking a little bit. And so when I talk to people about it, it's very much about becoming highly personable with an individual that has a disability or a limitation or impairment, and trying to listen to them. Don't just hear, listen to them, listen to what they're saying, and work with them in such a way that you build their trust, and vice versa. And once you build trust, you then get to the point where people may actually think, all right, I'll try this because Phil said it was a good thing to do, or he's showing me this. So it's a highly communicative sort of environment that you need to be in with an individual, and it's hard to teach that, but people do learn it though. But it is all about having that very close relationship with an individual, and trying best to understand them and get them to trust you, as I said.
Yeah, I think it's all, it, from what you've said, it's all comes down to communication, but just a different style than what, many of us are used to, or just to default to, right? But
Yeah.
like, I always say, like, sometimes communication becomes uncomfortable because we're learning something new, or we're having to stretch the brain, in a way that's like, okay, I have to figure out a different way to try and, like, understand this other person, in any area, in any context. But I have to, like, I always describe it as like a brain stretch. Sometimes that is the work, because that actually helps us, learn different ways. And then,
Yeah,
no, I think the more that we do it, you sort of said, like, it's really hard, but people tend to learn. I think we learn by doing it, and we learn by
absolutely.
witnessing it, and maybe, like, someone taking your example or your lead and going, oh, I'm going to try that, and just finding their way through for themselves, right?
Yeah, but it's also the individual. If you're the person working as a trainer, or as a guide, or as a carer, it's your approach. You've got to really focus on their needs, on the individual's needs, their capabilities, their limitations, and the way in which they need to be communicated. Because people with disability have lots of different ways of communicating with you, and they're not all the same. So obviously, someone with a hearing impairment will be different to someone who is a visual impairment, or someone with an intellectual disability. All of them require a different approach, a different way of communication, and you have to be prepared to be quite versatile in the way in which you work with people.
Hmm. So it sort of brings me to a question that I'm kind of throwing at you at this stage, but it makes me wonder if, even if it's outside of any disability sector, how do you think that anyone could take that approach with anyone that they work with or live with or are around?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is sort of gets back to human nature now, but I always like to think that I like to treat people as I would like them to treat me. So I don't yell at people. I don't want them yelling at me. I don't swear at people. I don't want them swearing at me.
Yeah.
I don't direct people, and I don't want them directing me. So it's all about, I treat people how I want them to treat me. And, that's, I suppose that's pretty obvious, but it's very true. Um, yeah, it's about, for me, it's about having empathy. It's about caring. It's about understanding individuals. It's about wanting to learn about them. It's about wanting to help, but without pushing people through, unimaginable things or painful things or things which are not going to work. So it is all about learning. I learn every day. Never stop learning, as most people do. But it's all of those things. It's difficult to put in a package, but just to answer your question, as I said at the very beginning, I want people to treat me as I treat them, and that really is the ethos in which I operate.
I like that because, like you said, yeah, it seems obvious, but what does that actually mean? And it's something to sort of remember each day or each circumstance, no matter how activated we might become or frustrated with someone else. Again, even generally,
Hmm.
it's also okay. How, if I was choosing how to approach this, how would I actually choose to approach this rather than being in the reaction and
Yeah,
and sometimes that reaction is fear because we don't know how to handle something, or or like frustration or whatever that is. So
I agree.
I I like that because I think it's such a broad um area that it can be applied to. It's such a like it's we learn so much, and this is, again, this is just my thoughts and feelings on it, but I feel like we learn so much by sort of doing work or learning about different communication, especially in areas of disability and everything, that we can apply everywhere so it does benefit everyone. It's not just, like when we sort of we learn better and do better, or at least keep trying to do better in this area or in one area, it does benefit everyone. It does sort of have that flow on effect.
Yeah, I mean, I work, as you stated, I work across multiple sectors at the moment. I work in disability. I work in sport. I'm chair of Skate Australia, which is a huge organisation for skateboarders and all the other disciplines we deal with. I work in outdoors education, outdoors recreation area, and I work in physical activity and sport. But it doesn't matter where I work. It is all about my ethos, and that is, I want people to treat me as I treat them. So if I'm reasonable, if I'm respectful, I show integrity, then I want that back from people as well. And I expect that if that's the way I'm treating people, then that's the way I expect them to treat me. And I think for me that's just how I operate.
Mm. Yeah, no, I like it. I'm definitely a fan of that. Well, is there anywhere that people can connect with you if they want to, like, learn more about you or the work you do or the Alliance, anything like that? What's
Yeah, thank you. So the Australian Sporting Alliance for People with Disability, ASAPID is the rather awkward acronym. If you go online to that, asapd.org, you'll find our website. My phone number and email are on the website. I have no problem people, contacting me. I have a LinkedIn profile. That's probably the end of my social media, so I do focus on those ones.
Yeah, I can include all these links in the show notes as well.
Yeah,
But
yeah. No problem at all. As I said, my focus at the moment is disability, but I have a lot of different other areas, a lot of other areas rather that I've worked in, and happy to have a chat with people if they want to have a chat about things, about different subjects and so on. Yeah.
awesome. Thank you so much for your time. It was such a good conversation of all the things inclusivity and how we can just apply that in every area, but also, yeah, bringing awareness or more awareness to these areas that deserve to have all of that. So no, I appreciate your time as well.
Thanks very much, Jess.